Chapter 38. A Dangerous Assignment. Yakov had been idly rocking back and forth in his favorite chair, eyes closed, listening carefully to all that David had been telling Ari. Now he came back to life, sat up straight, and turned abruptly to Ari. "Stay out of it. The CIA's being set up. The 9 aren't ETIs." "Come on, Yakov," returned David uneasily. "Let's not get sidetracked onto that demon thing again, okay?" "You just listen to what I have to say," returned Yakov impatiently, "and you'll learn something. I used to practice cabala, heavy occultism, and I'm telling you that the 9 are well known in occult circles. They've been making contact with spirit mediums in séances for centuries." "So?" "They never posed as ETIs until recently. They used to pretend to be ascended masters who lived thousands of years ago. Only lately have they claimed to be highly evolved extraterrestrials, but they're still channeled the same way, through spirit mediums." "Give us an example," demanded David. "It was the 9 who put Andrija Puharich, an American medical scientist, onto psychic research, and Israeli psychic Uri Geller. The 9 were even listed in an Esalen catalog as teaching a course in Gestalt therapy through a resident medium." "Esalen?" asked David. "Yeah, I've heard of it," volunteered Ari. "Almost visited it the one time I was in California, but I was too busy at Stanford. It's kind of a New Age think tank south of San Francisco where the human potential movement got its start." "Right," continued Yakov. "Anyone knowledgeable in the occult would tell you that the 9 have been known for centuries as spirit entities, not as ETIs." "It doesn't necessarily mean they're the same entities just because they have the same name," objected Ari. Yakov shook his head. "If these ETIs are so all-powerful, do you think they'd let some other entities use their name and cause that kind of confusion?" "I thought séances were a hoax," put in David, but his voice lacked conviction. "Most of them are," agreed Yakov, "but not all of them. Any grade school child in Israel can tell you that the Torah forbids séances and all attempts to contact spirits. You remember King Saul went to the Witch of Endor, and his dabbling in the occult brought destruction to him and his army. The CIA's fate will be the same if they keep this up." "So why does the Torah forbid séances?" asked Ari, becoming interested in spite of his rejection of the Bible. "Because, as I tried to tell you both the other day, the spirits contacted in séances, and the supposed ETIs that science believes in, are actually demons bent upon deception and destruction." There was a long silence. David and Ari exchanged uncomfortable glances but said nothing. They seemed to be taking Yakov's pronouncements about demons at least somewhat seriously for the first time. "By the way, the New Testament mentions the 9, even calls them the archons in the Greek." "You're putting us on," laughed Ari. "Chapter and verse, okay?" "Laugh if you want, but I'm warning you." Yakov looked over his glasses like a teacher scolding his pupils. "The archons is an expression in the Greek used by one of Israel's greatest rabbis, Saul of Tarsus. He lived in the 1st century and hated Christians with a passion, had them imprisoned and killed. Then he suddenly turned 180 degrees, became the world's leading Christian of all time, the Apostle Paul." "Why this sudden change?" asked Ari. David was looking increasingly uncomfortable, obviously displeased with Yakov for persistently bringing up religion. "He claimed that Jesus had proved his resurrection by personally appearing to him," said Yakov, "and he began to preach that Jesus was Israel's Messiah." "You take his word for it?" demanded Ari. "No, we have proof. The other apostles acknowledged that Paul knew everything they had been taught by Christ, and more. He corrected Peter publicly and wrote more epistles than all of the others together. There is no explanation except direct contact by Paul with the resurrected Christ." Ari was impressed, but reluctant to admit it, even by a look, especially in David's presence. Yakov got to his feet and faced Ari, gesturing emphatically. "Testimony like that would stand up in any court. You've got to be blind or perverse to deny it. Jewish history admits that Saul, a leading rabbi who hated and persecuted Christians, suddenly became one of them, exposing himself to imprisonment and eventually his own martyrdom. Why? It doesn't make sense unless his story is true. It could have been a fantasy. A hallucination. Yakov smiled patiently. Saul of Tarsus was not given to fantasy. He was a brilliant man, a hard-headed rabbi, and utterly opposed to Christianity. It took something supernatural to change him so suddenly and completely. His life and teachings have impacted mankind more than anyone else's except Jesus himself. To say it was all based upon a fantasy isn't rational. He had to be convinced beyond a shadow of a doubt that Jesus had been raised from the dead and was Israel's Messiah. Or he certainly wouldn't have become one of the believers he hated. David had been listening to Yakov with growing exasperation. Is this your way of announcing that you, like Saul, believe Jesus was Israel's Messiah? He demanded. I've told you that before, said Yakov calmly. Hinted at it. No, told you, but you didn't want to hear it. If this gets out, countered David in dismay, it will be a terrible blow to the military. One of Israel's last living heroes of all 5 wars betrays her. It's not a betrayal, shot back Yakov quickly. You keep forgetting. Jesus was Jewish. Look, interrupted Ari, we were talking about ETIs. You brought up this Saul of Tarsus because he'd said something about the 9. That's what I was getting to, said Yakov, settling back into his rocking chair. The Apostle Paul mentions these entities in one of his letters to the early Christians. Tell us about it. Yakov began to read from the open Bible he was holding. Quote, We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. End quote. The Greek word Paul used for rulers was cosmokrators, an epithet for Satan. And the word translated principalities was arche, or archons. He wrote about archons 1900 years ago? Ari was astonished. Exactly. And what he said explains something about them. In Paul's day, the 9 magistrates who ruled Athens were called archons, which is why these entities call themselves the 9. So the 9 were people, not ETIs, interrupted David. I don't see the connection. Let me finish. Paul was talking about Satan and his demons, and he said that just as there was a hierarchy of 9 men who ruled Athens, so a hierarchy of demons was in control of the evil that rules this world. And he argued that these evil beings, not other humans, were the real enemies of mankind. How do we verify that? Demanded Ari, intrigued now. Look the word up in any dictionary, countered Yakov with a confident smile. I'll do that. There was a long silence. Ari became aware that David had been watching him intently. Tell me, said David at last, why the name Archon means so much to you. I find it intriguing, responded Ari quickly, playing it cool. Should he tell them the truth? He'd been sworn to secrecy. But what was his obligation to Elor? He glanced over at Yakov. You must see some significance, or you wouldn't have gone into this explanation, right? Yakov made no reply. He, too, seemed to be regarding Ari with unusual interest. There's more to it than that, insisted David. What is it? I've debated whether to tell you. One of the 9, I guess, at least that's what he claimed to be, has already contacted me. When was that? Demanded David sharply. You should have reported it immediately. I was sworn to secrecy. You don't have any secrets from the office. That was long before you recruited me, before I even knew you worked for the office. Well, you're with us now. Let's hear about it. They've haunted my dreams most of my life, tried to control my thoughts, and I've fought it. Nearly drove me crazy at times. The first waking contact came almost 30 years ago in East Berlin. The next one was a few years later in Paris. The third time was here in Jerusalem about 4 months ago. This well-dressed Israeli businessman came up to me in the street. Medium height, about 40, in a beige linen suit, asked David incredulously. And he suddenly disappeared? Yeah, replied Ari in surprise. How did you know? Some of my men were following you. That was before you got on to us. They didn't know where this guy came from, said he just suddenly appeared, or where he went. They claimed he just vanished. I didn't believe the report. Chewed them out. Almost sacked one of them. They said a huge white dove settled on his head while he was talking to you. Then it was gone. "So your men saw it too," exclaimed Ari. "Then I'm not losing my mind. That's not all the guy did. He pulled a large stone out of a building without touching it, then put it right back into place. A flame suddenly ignited in the palm of his hand. It wasn't phony. I could feel the heat. Unbelievable. But I saw it." "And he said he was an Archon?" "Yeah. Called himself Elor, one of the 9. He could read my mind. I'm dead if I double-cross him. How can I get Carla to give me information about the 9 without them knowing what I'm doing? They probably already know what we're planning. There's no way you can fight them." "Did he say he was going to contact you again?" asked David. Ari nodded. "Soon. But I don't know where or when." "Okay, when he does," said David cautiously, "take a direct approach. Ask him what they're up to with the CIA. He might tell you. In the meantime, keep working on Carla. You're making good progress, judging from the letters she writes, but there isn't much time. We think something big is about to break." Ari made no response. How had he gotten himself into this? He was working for the Mossad, and at the same time, the 9. According to David, they were against Israel, yet they planned to use him to rescue Israel from its chosen people delusion and from Zionism. That sounded legitimate and beneficial. It was the only way to bring peace in the Middle East. The Mossad must be misinformed. David's concerned voice brought him back to the present. "I know what you're thinking. It's an unusually dangerous assignment, but we'll give you the training and the backing to carry it out successfully." Yakov snorted in disapproval. "You're sending him up against demons. He needs God's protection, not some irrelevant spy training." "I appreciate your concern, Yakov," said David evenly, "but not your interference in office business." Yakov was not backing down. "I'm warning you both. You're up against demons. Satan's preparing the world for the Antichrist, and Israel is a special target for his seduction. She'll be cleverly deceived into embracing her enemy as her Messiah, just because he'll guarantee her safety and bring her peace." Here he looked squarely at Ari with anguish. "And you could well play a part in her destruction." "Enough of this religious paranoia, Yakov!" David sprang to his feet and stormed out of the room. Pausing for a moment in the small entry hall, he called back to Ari. "Don't forget your assignment. I'll check with you later." He slammed the front door behind him and was gone. "I'm going out for a walk," said Ari, rising to his feet. "I know you mean well, but I get tired of always having your religion pushed on me. I thought you would have given up by now." Yakov regarded Ari with compassion. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I wouldn't want to push anything on you. It's your choice. But I'm warning you, don't get involved in this without God's protection. If you do, you're finished. Count on it."